So the aims of the session that we're going to go through this evening, as I was just mentioning there, first off, just to introduce people that are here to the ISBA position statement on PBS. So this was developed back in February. So ISBA was initially inaugurated, I suppose, in October 2021. And there's a number of subcommittees within the Irish Society for Behaviour Analysis, and one of them is a subcommittee on positive behaviour support. And the first task that we set ourselves really within that subcommittee was to create this position statement on PBS, to have a document to refer to in an Irish context to kind of guide the practice and standards within PBS delivery in Ireland. Then our next aim is to give everyone who's come this evening the opportunity to assess how our current practice aligns with the kind of guidance and the aspirations, I suppose, of the position statement, and then have some discussion on future practice developments. So the learning objectives then, participants should be able to describe the core content of the ISBA position statement on PBS. Second objective, to be able to evaluate the position statements and identify areas of alignment and misalignment with current service provision in Ireland, and then identify one area where our own current practice could be enhanced in line with the recommendations in the position statement. So the structure of the session then, as I was saying earlier on, first off, that presentation on PBS in Ireland, what it is and what it's not. And then I suppose I'll just say for anybody who's joining the call as we come in, we are recording this first part of the session. You may want to turn your cameras off so that you're not part of the recording, which will be hosted on the ISBA website afterwards. That's up to yourselves. So first part of the recorded portion of it will be that presentation on PBS in Ireland, what it is and what it's not. Then secondly, introducing the position statement briefly. Breakout room discussions and feedback, and then questions and answers and future developments. So I suppose the start point was thinking about why does it matter that we outline what PBS is in Ireland and identify what PBS is. And I suppose the main reason why it matters is we need to be able to distinguish a good practice from less effective supports to make sure that people can get access to the specialist supports that they need when they need it. So I'm going to start this portion of the presentation with a story of someone that I used to work with in England a few years back, who I'm going to call Lucy. So she was living in an area in England where I used to work for a specialist positive behaviour support service based in the community. She was in her 30s. She was diagnosed autistic and had a moderate intellectual disability. And she had a really skilled support team around her, which was made up of the professionals in the local adult community learning disability team, as it would have been termed in England. So she had learning disability nurse support, psychology support, SLT, social work. And she had a day service provision from the local council. 3 days a week, that was a regular day service in one of the usual day services within the council provision. But 2 days a week on a Thursday and Friday, she was in a hair salon on the high street in town, which was part of the day service provision from the council, to have a regular customer-facing hair salon where trainee stylists on their day service provision would work for the day and help out with hair colouring and with applying treatments, cleaning up afterwards, and all those kind of things in the same clothes as everyone else working there as trained stylists. And it was the best part of her week. It was the highlight of her week that she was getting to do a regular job where customers would see her. She was part of a local community, and it was the most important part of her week, which generally was going very well for her, and she loved that job. But occasionally there would be instances where she might shout at the people, her co-workers, she might shout and scream at the other customers there, and she might throw things, and people felt a threat in what was a customer-facing public business, which obviously was leading to a real potential of reputational damage for her, reputational damage for the council, and that whole idea of having that kind of day service, and potentially was going to end up with her being excluded from that that job that she loved. And there were behaviour support strategies in place, again, from the community learning disability team, but they were mainly focused on avoiding some of the triggers that were difficult for her, and there wasn't that overarching clear contextual formulation as to what was underpinning these issues. So there was more antecedent avoidance than trying to figure out all the important contextual factors that were combining to make these things not work well for her. So it wasn't working that well for her, and it wasn't looking good for her long term in terms of being able to maintain that placement. So she was referred for that specialist PBS input, but I guess the question then is, what is that, and what does that look like, and how is that different from what you had before? And that's, I suppose, that kind of contextualizes why this kind of stuff matters in terms of having those standards set up. So in an Irish context, what is PBS and what is not? So what it's not necessarily well understood. I think there's misunderstandings as to who should deliver it. Is it something that a behavior therapist or behavior specialist or a PBS manager or whatever delivers? It is, some people will say that a support worker, community support worker, is delivering behavior support and not see the difference between the complexity or the level of input that's involved in that. So there's not real clarity as to what it is, who should deliver it, what kind of experience they should have, what kind of qualifications, etc., and what should actually be delivered. It's not regulated. There's no agreed standards for training, experience, and ongoing supervision. So anybody could walk out the door tomorrow and say they're a behavior specialist and start operating as one. Now, I know there's differences in terms of who would be employed in different types of services with certain qualifications and backgrounds, but still there's no regulation around training, experience, and ongoing supervision. But while it's not regulated, it's a statutory requirement in HICWA designated centres, which is a real juxtaposition, I think, that it's a legal requirement, but yet there's not that clear regulation for it. It's certainly not uniform and consistent in relation to job titles, pay grades, qualifications, and experience. So there was some research done by the DBA that I was involved in with some colleagues back in 2019, that just for the people that responded to us, there was 14 different job titles amongst the 71 participants, and wild disparity in terms of terms and conditions, and very lots of differences in terms of person spec, in terms of qualifications, experience, all the rest of it. So a statutory requirement, but not regulated or very uniform at all. Then in terms of the goals, so we're trying to separate out what things might have been seen to be worthy goals in the past and what we're looking at, the way things should be. So what it's not is trying to change people to any particular socially expected norm. Now, I know there's, I've spoken recently to somebody with Asperger's who was talking about their experience of somebody came into my house as described themselves from an ABA background, trying to force me to make eye contact and change who I was. And their experience of that was really very traumatic for them. That should not be the goal at all. So it should be respectful neurodivergence, highly individualized, and aligned with human rights-based approaches. So it shouldn't be dismissive of a person's inherent characteristics, wants, or needs based upon their actions. So again, we're assuming that whatever's happening for the person is happening for a good reason, and we need to figure out what's happening in order to be able to intervene effectively. So we should be trying to find out why the person's environment can't meet their needs and build an environment that can allow them to flourish. Now, that could be removing stresses from the environment, upskilling the people around them, helping them to develop the skills they need to meet their own needs. That's our goals. And all of the things within this part of the presentation kind of align with the position statement, but it kind of gives a bit of context to it. So in terms of service delivery, it's not any one particular assessment or intervention approach, but it's a framework for the delivery of behaviourally informed supports. So taking the positive behaviour support framework, there are different ways of approaching it based on the context, based on the needs of the person. It's certainly not just antecedent avoidance or reactive strategies like Studio 3, MAPA, or CPI, and that's not saying that those things aren't important, but it should be comprehensive and multi-element support, looking at the environmental factors, teaching the person the skills that they need, trying to directly intervene in certain situations, and having ethical reactive strategies. So skills building is a key approach alongside ethical reactive strategies. So I think in the past there may be an assumption that behaviour support or positive behaviour support is reacting in the moment and keeping everyone safe, and surely that's a very valid part of the support, but it can't be the start and the end of it. It's certainly not just providing a behaviour support plan. And again, we're kind of thinking about the expectations of people might be a certain type of support is enough, but what we're trying to say is it's intervention at multiple levels of the system around the person. So directly teaching the person the skills required to meet their needs, upskilling key people in the person's life in person-specific behaviour strategies, addressing wider issues like staff consistency, appropriate physical environment, access to healthcare, etc., all based on a person's will and preferences using a person-centered planning approach. So for someone with significant behaviour support needs, there's going to be interventions needed at multiple levels of the system around the person, and only addressing one area is probably not going to be sufficient once we get to the higher level of need. It's not something that a behaviour specialist can just do by themselves, but should be a holistic and interdisciplinary approach comprised of behaviour strategies and key guidance from professionals such as social care workers, speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, psychology, social work, and others including medical professionals. And again, I suppose there may have been a tendency over time in the way services have developed, and behaviour support roles might have popped up on a kind of ad hoc basis when funding was available, and somebody might have been doing that kind of work almost in isolation. And we want to make sure that there's an interdisciplinary approach to meeting a person's needs and considering the whole person and all the important parts of that. Shouldn't be solely focused on working with individuals with significant behaviour support needs. And again, while I'm going through this, have in your mind that these breakout rooms are coming up where we'll be thinking about where are we aligned with this and where we have scope for improvement to be aligned with this. So what we want to have is a tiered approach to service-wide supports. So we're looking at the tiered model of PBS, service-wide PBS delivery, where we'd have tier 1 being service-wide universal supports. I had the idea of creating capable service environments. So if we can create capable service environments, we're less likely to see those more significant behaviour support needs developing. Tier 2 being targeted supports for groups of people at risk of developing or currently experiencing some more significant behaviour support needs. And then Tier 3 being the highly specialised, individualised supports for people with significant and highly impactful behaviour support needs with comprehensive functional behaviour assessment, behaviour support planning, etc. Now, I should have mentioned earlier on that to meet our requirements around CEU and CPD provision, there will be 3 CEU questions at the end of the presentation at the end of the hour, and I'll be giving them out later on, but they're tied to the content that we're talking about throughout the presentation. The processes then, so we've spoken about the goals, the service delivery, the processes. So how do we actually go about it? We're not just talking about rewards and punishments. We're trying to be evolving and progressive. So there's certainly in the past maybe an overemphasis on rewards and punishments as a way of looking at the kind of 2 sides of increasing, decreasing someone's motivation. We're trying to look at change over time to make the PBS service delivery in Ireland as up-to-date and ethical and progressive as it can be. We're not talking about behaviour modification, which would just be stop it from happening. We're talking about having assessment-informed support with contextually relevant and formulation-based intervention strategies. So in order to have that, we have to have a valid assessment that understands the context the person is in and what's going on around them, and builds a formulation around why their needs have developed the way that they have, and then how we can help them to get their needs met more effectively. Again, in terms of processes, it's not a simple statement of function. That's not the outcome of a functional behaviour assessment, but the outcome of a functional behaviour assessment is a synthesis of rich qualitative and quantitative data to produce a thorough and credible analysis and formulation. So we're not going to end up just with a list of triggers to be avoided, but we're going to end up with an understanding of the contextual factors that combine to establish motivative and reinforcing conditions that influence and maintain individual behaviour support needs. So it's complicated work in some ways, which leads us on to the skill set that's required to do that work. So I've got a reference at the bottom of this slide about the Angela Hasiotis-led UCL PBS study, which the outcomes of that study report in 2018, where in a UK context, community learning disability team staff members, which would have included psychologists, SLTs, OTs, social workers, were trained on a short course to try and upskill them to acquire the competencies required to conduct functional behaviour assessments, valid functional behaviour assessments, and related behaviour support plans, and achieve outcomes in terms of quality of life improvements and behaviour support need reductions. And the outcome of that study was that that training wasn't sufficient to upskill those skills clinicians to produce high quality functional behaviour assessments, behaviour support plans, which makes perfect sense to us because we know there's a significant skill set required that can't be acquired on a short training course. We're saying it's not a skill set that can be proficiently acquired in a short training course if we're going to be delivering comprehensive assessment intervention input. But it's a distinct skill set requiring extensive conceptual knowledge and supervised practical experience acquired over time in multiple settings to develop skilled competencies in the application of relevant assessment and intervention strategies. So if we're going to be developing those rich, contextually grounded functional behavior assessment, analysis and formulation outcomes, then we need to have a real understanding of the concepts, the basic processes, and the application of that. So where does that leave us in terms of what we need? So from our perspective, we need a better understanding of PBS in Ireland. And in terms of the efforts to address that so far, so dissemination efforts by the Irish Society for Behaviour Analysis and the Psychological Society of Ireland Division of Behaviour Analysis. So it's worth referencing, I think, at this point that the ISBA and DBA members attended the Oireachtas Committee, the Joint Committee on Disability Matters, on Thursday, the 4th of May, having, I suppose, contacted the committee to say that we thought that we'd something to add to the conversation around PBS and ABA in Ireland, and that appearance is on the Disability Matters webpage if you Google search that. From Thursday the 4th of May, which was a great opportunity for us to contribute to that conversation, that discussion around what behaviour support in Ireland might look like and how that can align with human rights obligations. And the development of the position statement, which is a start point for that position statement, was one of our efforts to try and build that better understanding of PBS in Ireland. And as I said, that was only 3 months ago in February when we created that. What else do we need? Standards, regulation, and recognition. So one of the core founding purposes of the ISBA was to achieve professional recognition, and DBA are also looking at that through the behavioral psychology route. And the ultimate goal is core registration, or whichever relevant regulator is there at the time, in order to provide some standards for service delivery and protection for the people that are at the receiving end of the services. So at the moment, we're in a position where somebody could receive services from somebody who says that they're a qualified ABA or a PBS professional, and we can't hold someone to account in any way if the services provided are not of a good standard or in any way unethical. So that's a real, there's a concern there for the protection of people receiving services. What we need more systems-wide applications and appropriate service provision. So ideally, we'd be preventing the need for higher intensity specialist input if we were focusing our efforts on creating capable environments by upskilling the people providing support, by ensuring the physical environments are capable, by providing skills-based interventions at an earlier stage, using a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 approach, and access to highly skilled PBS practitioners for effective individualized support. And again, I suppose that really leads back to the standards, regulation, and recognition, because if we establish the standards for what a highly skilled PBS practitioner should be, how they should be trained, their experience, then we're more likely to be able to provide that access. And training content and practice guidelines tailored to the Irish context. So we can try and ensure that those people in the greatest need can avail of high quality specialist support. And that brings me back to where I started in terms of the story of Lucy, and that we had that referral for her to try and provide that support. So the inputs that we were able to provide for Lucy then that would differ from what she had before was the completion of a comprehensive functional behaviour assessment report, which involved a detailed review of her records, which were extensive, functional assessment interviews with family members and with staff, and discussions with Lucy herself, data collection and analysis, direct observations as to what was going on. And the outputs from that then, I suppose, was 4 outputs which differ from what was there before. So the first thing was that there was a clear formulation and shared understanding of those contextual factors that were influencing our behaviour support needs. So, and this is where the kind of nuances is, and the kind of the detail of it became apparent, where it wasn't a simple case of Lucy does this to get attention or Lucy does this to get out of something. She was struggling to cope when her peers, so people who were also in that salon as accessing a day service within the salon, she struggled to cope when they were doing a higher status job than she was. So if she was sweeping the floor and they were helping someone get their hair washed or their hair colored, she would struggle with that because her job wasn't as important as the other person's job. But these things were happening in afternoons and not in the mornings. And what we thought about having looked back at her records, we saw that she had scoliosis. and that when she was on a Thursday and Friday in her day service in the salon, she was on her feet all the time. Monday to Wednesday in the regular day service settings, she was sat down most of the time. So we were thinking that she was less tolerant in the afternoons because of a gradual build-up in pain and discomfort. So that was contributing on top of the fact that other people were doing a better job than her. And then the outcome for her, if she was to start shouting and screaming and maybe throw things around the salon, was that she didn't get to do the better job, but nobody else did a job at all. So the outcome would be everyone needs to take time away to calm, meaning that she no longer had to watch somebody do a better job than she did. So everyone went away from doing their tasks and everyone sat down for 5-10 minutes and had time to calm down. So the thing that was annoying her would no longer be there. One of the things that was annoying her in the sense of somebody else doing a better job. So there was that understanding that wasn't there before as to what might be going on for her. Then we built a behavior support plan that had antecedent strategies like regular sitting breaks throughout the day when she was in the hair salon. Some skills teaching sessions. So on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, when she was in a training salon in one of the regular day services, she would do sessions where she was doing a great job and somebody else was doing a less important job, and then would flip that around for short periods of time, then gradually extend that so she could learn that it's not the end of the world if somebody's doing a better job than you, because you get to do a better job soon as well. Then there were direct interventions where when she was in the hair salon and she was doing a less skilled job, staff would tell her how much they appreciated it and how important that job was too. It's important that the floor is being cleared up because now the place looks great for the next person that's walking in. And then there were reactive strategies to minimize disruption and resolve any incidents as quickly and safely as possible. Then that was the written plan, but there was coaching for staff in implementation of the plan to ensure that they were competent in doing it and regular progress monitoring. So the outcomes for her on the basis of that then was that she learned the skills that she needed to tolerate those everyday stressors and keep doing something that she loved doing. Like, it was one of the most important parts of her week. She kept her place and her visibility in her local community, which was really important for her. Also very important for her family that their daughter and sister were involved in their local community, and people kind of understood her better, and they were more accepting of the need to make adaptations for her. So once they knew, nobody had made that appreciation before of the scoliosis issue, and then they knew that she needed those kind of regular breaks. So that all and she got skill support at the right time, which enabled her to have a more ordinary life. And that, I suppose, comes back to the position statement itself in terms of what we're doing with that. So highlighting the key parts of what that support will look like to ensure people can get that support when they need it. So within the position statement itself, and I'll share that now on the screen in just a minute, there are 4 sections which kind of relate to the presentation I just gave, but talk through PBS in an Irish context, talk to the qualifications, experience, and supervision of PBS practitioners. There's some process considerations for implementation, and then brief consideration of measuring outcomes. So I'll stop sharing this particular screen, and I'll start sharing the position statement on PBS. All going well. So you'll hopefully be seeing that position statement there now on the screen in front of you. So what I'm going to do is just scroll down through it and highlight a couple of key parts. So again, while we're going through this, bear in mind that you'll be in a breakout room in about 10 minutes, all going well, and you'll be having a few chats about it. So if something sticks out to you as something that we are well aligned with in our service delivery in Ireland, or on the opposite side of that, that's something you can bring into your breakout room and have a bit of discussion about. So first off, we're talking about what is positive behavioral support, and one of the key bits that we have at the start is talking about how we describe someone's behavior support needs, and we're trying to reference the fact that there's no one term that is necessarily entirely appropriate, and different terms have different connotations for different people, and we want to avoid using any terminology that sounds blameful or is stigmatizing. So we've said that within the position statement, we'll use behavior support needs as a broad description, and people may have different views on that as to what the right kind of terms are, but that's where we've gone with it. Then we've been thinking about the goals, the behavior support needs that are appropriate for intervention within the framework. So ideally, goals the person has chosen for themselves, or actions that impact on the human rights of other people, or actions that are causing harm to the person themselves where they don't have the capacity to make those decisions. So obviously with the Assisted Decision Making Act, there's even a greater focus on those kind of issues. If someone is doing something harmful to themselves, affects only themselves, and they're able to weigh up those consequences and accept those consequences, there's limitations as to what we can do about that. But being clear about where intervention should be and shouldn't be happening. So we're saying, in contrast to some of those things described above, harmless repetitive movements such as self-stimulatory or stimming behaviors shouldn't be targeted for change, because again, we want to be clear that some of the harm that has been caused to people in the past through behavior interventions shouldn't continue to be repeated. And we want to be clear that we're listening to people about the experiences that they've had and how things need to change. Then in terms of who PBS is for, because this question comes up occasionally, so we're saying it's primarily developed to meet the behaviour support needs of children and adults with IDs, but has been extended to other needs and populations, and again stating that it's identified as a legal requirement under the HICWA regulations. So that's kind of the context in Ireland. And then, so what are the goals? So ideally, and I think this is important to say, like ideally, the main aim should be to support people to be in control of their own lives as much as they can. And I think we're moving away from, I know we have an upcoming CEU event in a few months' time about moving the process over the last 30, 40 years of deinstitutionalization, but supporting people to be in control of their own lives rather than us as a disability support service providers being in control of what's going on for people. And those goals should be looking at quality of life improvements alongside reduction in behaviour support needs. And then in terms of values and ethics, I know I'm whistling through this, but I think it's just important to give you a bit of an orientation, because I'm sure many people won't have had an opportunity as of yet to read it. The values and ethics were person-centred and aligned with human rights obligations in our work. We've made a reference on here to restricted practices to say where such interventions are in place to ensure immediate safety, PBS practitioners will advocate and plan for the reduction and elimination, to say that we're actively involved in trying to reduce the use of restricted practices wherever possible. Now, we've made explicit reference to say that concepts and principles derived from applied behaviour analysis are the main theoretical underpinnings of the approach, again, because they're in the Disability Matters report, I think back in February, there was reference to PBS being problematic because of its association with ABA. And we can't shy away from the fact, obviously, that PBS is based on ABA as the main theoretical underpinnings. But we can reference that and highlight that alongside the fact that there's evolutions in the way that that's applied. And we've spoken here about the fact that we're, in terms of functional behaviour assessment, we're looking at addressing shortcomings in the person's environment alongside developing the skills, to emphasize the fact that skills development is a key part of this approach, and not just identification of triggers and removal of triggers. So that brings us on then to the qualifications, experience, and supervision, which again, having highlighted earlier on the disparity in qualifications and experience across loads of different service providers, it's very important to outline. So we're emphasizing again that PBS practitioners require significant training in concepts, principles, and processes of behavior change, as well as practical experience. And we're saying that the person specification for, and we said PBS practitioner here because the variety in job titles, will be educated to master's level in a relevant course sequence. And then we've outlined the kind of experience requirements underneath that. Then we've highlighted that PBS practitioners should receive regular supervision. And again, the importance of that is to be able to have a standard to say, if someone's working in a service as a behaviour therapist, behaviour specialist, whatever the term is, they need to have access to regular supervision and can't operate in isolation. And in the absence of a standard, that could be, that might not be provided. Again, we've made reference to the fact that while it's a statutory requirement, we don't have regulations or enforceable standards around qualifications and experience, or around supervision. And then we've made reference to the fact that these experience standards, some people will predate these experience standards, highly qualified and highly competent practitioners, and we've made reference to that fact there. But I won't go to that into that detail at the moment. Then in terms of process considerations, we've started off by talking about the tiered approach. And again, in terms of thinking about where we're currently well aligned and where the scope for improvements in alignment, this may be one area where ideally we would like to see PBS practitioners in Ireland spend a lot of time working on developing capable support environments rather than spending a lot of time at the tier 3 level. So when we look at the tiered approach to positive behaviour support, systems-wide positive behaviour support, there are 3 tiers within that. Now, I've just got a message here, Ellen, about joining a breakout room, which I won't be doing right now. So I'll say cancel, but I don't know if everybody else has gotten that message up there. So within the systems-wide PBS approach, there are 3 tiers, beginning in Tier 1, universal supports, Tier 2, targeted supports, Tier 3, individual supports. So we've referenced capable support environments within those 3 different tiers. Tier 1 being providing capable support environments, described what that might look like in terms of systemic whole organization or community-wide approach to delivery PBS. And reference the fact that those kind of systemic applications will reduce the number of people requiring those top-level Tier 3 supports. But we've also stated, in an Irish context, the core work of many practitioners is in the provision of Tier 3 supports, because that's where a lot of us are at. Speaking for myself personally anyway, that's where my time is often allocated. So then we've described those Tier 3 supports in a bit more detail, because we're thinking if that's what's happening more broadly, we need to give a lot more kind of context to that. So when we talk about Tier 3 supports, we're talking about comprehensive functional behavior assessment and everything that goes along with that. So comprehensive functional behavior assessment, assessment-informed behavior support plan, implementation support, including coaching of staff, database decision-making, gradual fading of PBS practitioner input. So we've said that it's going to vary in intensity regarding or related to the context. Every person is different, every context is different. It will take time for PBS practitioner input to be faded successfully, and that relies on the supports being in place that we can fade that out over time. Then we've made reference here to some benchmarking activities undertaken by some of the members of the subcommittee. So there's some, I suppose, practical or clinical experience and some research studies, mainly I was one that I was involved in terms of a service evaluation of that positive behaviour support service. I worked in Halton in northwest of England, around what service delivery looks like in those kind of specialist PBS service providers. And when you look at the caseloads held, and you work that down to the amount of hours of input per person that would be required based on those caseloads for that top level input, 10 hours per month of clinical support per person, front loaded, not forever, but front loaded to develop that comprehensive functional behavior assessment and behavior support plan and train staff and oversee that. 10 hours per month per person is a figure that comes out from the caseloads of approximately 10 people per one-time whole-time equivalent post. Now, I'd imagine a lot of us would think that is a much lower number than what is currently delivered in Ireland. And this is where the alignment, misalignment discussion might start when you go to your breakout room. But this is based on a number of case studies and descriptions of effective specialist positive behavior support teams. And I think that we can, within this subcommittee on positive behavior support, we'll look into making some of those some of the information that backs it up available on the website or through the PBS subcommittee, because some people have asked for that information already. So we'll be able to give more information about that in time. And then the last section is talking about measuring outcomes, which is basically saying that bespoke individualized data collection systems are the benchmark because of the individual needs that are required. And we should be looking at measuring quality of life improvements as well as change in behavior support needs. And their PBS practitioners have to be skilled in designing and amending those systems based on the needs of the person, the context they're in, whether it's a service environment, a family home, etc. And then some discussion of some validated outcome measures that could also be used in addition to those individual measures, and some references at the end. That's your whistle-stop tour of the position statement, which hopefully was useful in orienting you towards some of that information. At that point now, Alan, I think we can stop the recording of the presentation if you're able to do that.